All right, so we were talking last time. You're talking about the work that you do, with parents, families that are dealing with addiction and behavioral issues in their home and all that sort of thing. And I thought that it might be interesting to talk about a little bit more of your background because I think what you bring to this area is that you have a lot of experience with addictions, mental health issues, kind of emotional dysregulation, etc. And I just thought, okay, let's talk about that, and maybe you can say more about, okay, what brought you to this, like your experience, your career, what's gone on in your life, because it seems like when you're talking to these families and people who have these challenges, that whatever you're saying or doing is really resonating with them. I wanted to kind of understand that a little bit more. Like, what is it about your experience and what you do that's really resonating with them?
Yeah. So it's two things. One of them is, so I work mainly with families, mostly parents, like 90% parents, but sometimes husbands and wives, in which there's addiction in the household, not just addiction, but severe addictions, multiple addictions, severe mental health issues, multiple mental health issues. And so these are people who, what I say is they come to me as an option of last resort because everything else has sort of failed. So their loved one has been in and out of treatment for like maybe seven, eight, nine times. And they've been dealing with addiction in their household for like 10 to 15 years. And now their child is not a child anymore. They're like 28, 30, 35, sometimes even 50 years old, still not able to get their life off the ground. Sometimes they're living at home, but always needing assistance of some kind. So, what I'm, let me just say that's the main kind of category of client that comes to me by the time they find us. It's like that. So the reason they like talking to me is twofold. One, I come from the addiction mental health side. Like I'm not the parent of a person who is addicted. My daughter's fine. Like she has a good head on her shoulders. I don't see anything as I, continue to look that she's fine. So I'm the person with the addiction. I'm the person with the multiple mental health issues. But I've been in recovery on the journey of resolving this, managing myself, you could say healing myself since 1995. So we're talking 30 years of experience in doing all these different things. And so they, I talk in a language that they understand. What I get a lot is, wow, you talk just like the way my son thinks. Like you just explained my son and how he thinks, or you just explained my wife. That is amazing. It's like I'm talking to them right now, but they're telling me everything, you know, all the things they don't want to tell me. And like, so I have that. And then the other thing is this protocol that I do, which helps them to, in the moment, be much more peaceful in their relationships. So you can imagine talking to a person like that who has multiple mental health issues. They are very defensive. They're very angry a lot. They're very self-righteously angry and upset, and then they use on top of it. They also steal money. They also lie a lot. So this is a very difficult relationship. So
Yeah, so it's interesting. So you're saying that because you have lived a life that your clients, loved ones, or their children, or whoever it is that's having those challenges, you've kind of lived that same life. So you
yeah,
know how they feel. You know why they're responding a certain way to their mom or dad or whatever. Can you talk about that a little bit more? I want to understand, like,
well,
how
the
that
insight
works.
that I have is from, I'll be honest, the insight that I have is from the mental health perspective. And so when I'm interacting with parents, I honestly do say, what do you think about mental health? Because a lot of times people don't like it. They don't like dealing with the labels. They think it's a bunch of like, basically they think mental health diagnoses and labels is a big money grab from insurance companies, to get the diagnosis and the code in so we can start billing you and stuff like that. And I'm not denying that there's an aspect of that, but when you look at symptomology lists and diagnostic criteria, it does have lists of explanations of things. And so, what I say is that if you don't like the labels, you're not going to like this. If you don't like those labels and stuff, you're not going to like this. So I come from that perspective, first of all. So I talk about my condition from a holistic perspective, understanding brain neurophysiology, understanding mental health labels, understanding spirituality, and on top of that, understanding the ego and how the mind of an addict thinks. So I come from
Yeah.
all these different angles, but mainly it stems from the way that person's brain is designed.
Can I understand that correctly? So when you're talking to your clients and they have a loved one, a child who has addiction or other challenges, and you start saying, exploring the mental health aspect, do they don't want to think that this is mental health related because it has some kind of a connotation or stigma? I mean, isn't it almost by definition that many or most people who have addictions have some type of mental health issues, or is it not the case? Like there are people who have addictions who have no issues at all with their mental health. Mental health's perfectly fine. Like I'm trying to
Sometimes you get
understand.
that. Yeah, sometimes I do get, the behavior. So sometimes I get all they need is just to change their behavior and honestly get their head out of their ass. They just need to make better decisions, and we just need to like, keep on teaching it to them until they get it. And what
Okay.
I tell people is if your son or daughter or wife or husband is like in their 40s to 50s, maybe even 35, and they've been trying all their lives to get it and have this kind of functional life that you want, they're showing you the best that they have. They would have
Mhm.
done it by now. They've had 15 to 20 years to do it, to show you
Yeah.
and stuff. So that's one thing. Another thing is what I tell them is I can see the difficulty with the mental health labels because there's always the word disorder after, the label usually, substance abuse disorder, something like that. And it always starts with the premise that you're disordered, you have a problem. So I do say to them, I try to veer away from those words disorder and sort of see it as a description. So I say to people, I don't see like being autistic, ADHD, even PTSD as a problem. I see it as a description. But if
Hmm.
you see it as a problem, you're not going to like the label. So
Yeah.
being autistic, it doesn't, saying that doesn't cause me concern. I don't, because I'm not saying I'm broken. I'm just
Yeah.
saying there's a description that goes along with the way my brain is designed.
Yeah. I think this is actually important because it seems to me like a lot of people with the label, it implies that you're broken, there's something wrong, something needs to be fixed. And I think what you're saying is, no, this is just the way you are or your loved one is. Yeah, so there's no value judgment.
It's
We
just
exist.
being that way isn't a problem. Somebody just wrote here, it's a problem when it causes problems. That's exactly like,
Mhm.
so if you ask me, when does addiction become addiction? When does a problematic behavior become a problem or addiction? When it starts to affect other parts of your life that you care about and you can't stop, like your finances, your relationships, your health, then it's a problem. So I agree with what that person wrote there.
Yeah. So when people have the, I guess, these qualities, these conditions, what is it that you're doing that is helping them understand what's going on? So that itself is not intrinsically a problem. It's the behavior that results from it. So what is that? What's causing that behavior? Why is it that people who have these conditions have these behaviors? Like, what are they doing? They're masking, they're
Yeah. So
suppressing,
the
they're
main thing is, yeah. So the main thing is I try to help them to understand what's coming out of their brain, how their brain was actually designed. So they're realizing now that brains are like thumbprints. Let me put that right out because a lot of, yes, there are categories of treatments and medications and things that people do that can help whole groups of people. But first of all, understand that brains are like thumbprints, meaning everyone is different. So everyone's going to have a little bit of a difference. What's going to work for some person is not going to work for another person. Or what works for that person in this part of his life may not work later on and stuff. So what I help the parents understand is everything that's coming out of them is coming out of their brain, how their brain was designed to handle the reality, or you should say to handle the societal structure that humankind has created to live in. Let me also, this is another important thing. Um, Usually what's considered a disorder or a disability, stuff like that, is mainly because they cannot work full time. They cannot contribute to the economic society economic structure that humankind has created to live in. And I'm not criticizing that. I don't think it's possible to create a living structure for 8 billion people that'll cover everyone perfectly. They're going for the middle. We just don't function well in that. So let me just put that out there too.
So basically, you're saying that society has been organized by neurotypical people, and therefore there's an expectation of how everyone should act. And if you don't act and behave in a certain way, you don't really fit in society, and that causes some of these problems.
Well, I'm glad you said that too, because you can have autism, you not have, you can be autistic and be ADHD and function fine in society. I've met people who are ADHD and autistic, and they're in the medical field and function fine in it. They work really autistic people, in my opinion, sometimes in certain office environments is a superpower because they need order and routine. They like regularity, meaning they get anxious if people aren't following routines and order. And so they love creating systems and Excel spreadsheets. And that's great when you're a supervisor
Hmm.
looking to make sure that your workers are competently doing their job. An autistic person who's like that is great. They're not maybe great at a staff meeting. And the same with an ADHD person. An ADHD person can, they focus it well enough, they can get a lot done. So I've seen people work well in these kinds of environments who aren't neurotypical.
Okay. But then what drives someone to feel that the addictive behavior is somehow mitigating the trouble they have, the feelings or whatever it is? Like why would some people then have these addictions? What is it that's
So
happening that
yeah, someone else has written here. Oh, it's the same person. Thank you very much, Katie. I really appreciate it. Because they're writing, and I was a good teacher, but I got burnt out. Now I work nights because it's quiet. So thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate that. You're being honest here and helping out with this conversation. It's possible for a person who has these mental health issues, like me. This is what happened to me. Very, very functional in the very beginning, and then you can go through what's called a mental health burnout. Um, and that is a term that usually refers to autistic people, but I think can really also refer to a lot of mental health issues like clinical depression, generalized anxiety. Burnout basically means you go through either a life event that's just, traumatic, or you just have the pileup of living through life. Then all of a sudden, your body and brain is not able to function at the same level anymore. Your distress tolerance goes down and your functionality tanks. And that's what a lot of the parents say, like, yes, it's exactly, like he was doing well until all of a sudden he just began drinking a lot more. He used to always drink, but it was never a problem. Or when my wife lost her job and her career and all, she tried to like get other jobs and all, but then it's just the drug problem started. How old's your wife? She's in her 40s. It just happened all of a sudden. So you can have this burnout where you start out functional, quite functional, and then not.
they were self-medicating? There was pain, there was depression, there was some other issue, and they're turning to alcohol or drugs to dull that pain, to
Yeah, I
repress it.
met a guy he was a university professor in his 40s, looked like a university professor, really smart. He looked like a university professor. He was wearing like a tweed jacket, everything. And he said, I became a functioning alcoholic at the age of 46. 46. Like, it's like, I'd never had that problem before. And I was like, yeah, you probably went through a burnout. Like your brain, after a certain point, maybe the responsibilities grew, or sometimes it's just life. For me, I went through this kind of burnout when got married, had the kid, got the house. And now I had to stay in jobs. Before, like I always had problems with jobs because of my mental health and stuff like that. I needed more flexibility to go from job to job. But when I got the house and the kid, and now I had responsibilities, and a wife was expecting, like, like my brain over time could not take that. And the drinking escalated.
Okay, so for you, it was the stress. You
Yeah,
just couldn't
just
handle
general
it.
stress. Yeah. Yeah. But it can also
And
happen in a life event like losing a career, the breakup of a really important relationship that can cause a burnout state as well. So you can have people who have these mental health issues who function fine in society until this kind of thing happens, and then their ability to deal with life just tanks. And I should say this, lots of times it can last for years, and lots of times their original functionality never comes back to its full level. So I've seen people online where they're talking about this. One of them was a licensed therapist who had a thriving business who went into a burnout state and lost her entire business over, and she was talking after like 3 years of being in a burnout state, lost all of her clients. And she was now concerned about losing her marriage because she couldn't even raise her children.
Hmm.
And she looked college educated. She looked like a American house mom.
Yeah, what are people supposed to do in that situation? Because, you're married, you have a kid, you've got a house with a mortgage, you do have responsibility, you do have to
Yeah.
pay the bills, you do have this pressure, blah, blah, blah. And so, that's, I mean, I think that's a pretty typical condition. Some people then, because of the way their brain chemistry works, whatever, it drives them to addictions. But what are you supposed to do in that situation?
Well, what I say, if I tell the parents, so I mainly work with the parents or the partners of people with these problems, the family members, because honestly, the people with the problems, they don't want to talk to me. They don't want to go into recovery because they honestly, when you get like that, you become you hate yourself. Like your sense of self-worth just takes a tanker along with it. So
Hmm.
understand that people like us, we feel our brains are designed to feel an intensity of emotions that I would say are like 5 to 10 times more intense than the average. So we feel everything, including joy, happiness, and love, intensely. But along with that, one of the main feelings, especially when a person's functionality goes down, they're having problems, that I see that they're really feeling intensely is self-loathing, self-hatred, low
Hmm.
self-worth. And so
Hmm.
they don't get the help that they need because they're just feeling so bad about themselves and stuff. But if I were to work with them, I'd tell the parents, if I were to work with your love, then the first thing I would say is get a handle on your mental health. Get a handle on, when I say mental health, I just mean get a handle on how God created your brain. And like, it was created in a certain kind of way, and not every brain can function well in the society under certain kinds of pressure. So don't blame yourself. Really, it's like understanding the engine of your car or something like that. Like every engine generally, like the difference between like a CRV and a Tesla is different. So just understand that, and then from there, you know, just know how your brain was designed so you know what you need to function better.
Yeah. And you're saying because some of these people who have self-loathing and addiction issues, they spiral downwards. Their loved one, let's say their parents, their spouse or partner, whoever, doesn't really understand what's going on, and therefore they can't help those people effectively. And that's why you can help those loved one, the parents of
Yeah, when I
the
talk,
person.
yeah, when I start talking about mental health like this, that helps them to understand because otherwise it looks just like a behavioral issue. It just looks like you're just choosing to be like this. We're not choosing to be like this. Who would choose to have a life that's worth living, take a tanker over several years because you're making decision after decision after decision for years and years that cause you to lose it and stuff. So it's like once I
Yeah.
tell them about the mental health stuff and how important it is and explain, like, particularly when I see multiple addictions, multiple mental health issues, that usually points to a severely dysregulated brain. Just emotionally dysregulated, meaning the intensity of the emotions is just way too strong for the trigger that brain is coming upon. That's why parents, I say, like, isn't it like their reactions and responses to things are way beyond what the thing calls for? Yeah, they do. And they start yelling at me, and it's a small thing I'm trying to explain, and they just get really defensive. Like, yeah, because our emotions and our brains are just wired very intensely and
Hmm.
stuff. So,
Yeah, that's actually, I think, very insightful that the issue is not something they can choose or not choose. It's not self-discipline. It's not knowledge. It's as what you're saying. Like they don't want a life of being unemployed or having emotional outbursts or whatever it is. This
yeah.
is this is just
So
the way
they're,
it is.
yeah. So usually when you're emotionally dysregulated, one, you're feeling a lot of self-loathing, but then two, what you're feeling a lot is not safe. You're really not feeling safe. You're feeling generally scared all the time. And when you really, so in my sobriety, what I've given them is the gift of not drinking, using marijuana, not using addictions, and just dealing with the emotionality of my brain. Because a lot of them, they're drinking so much or using drugs so much that it's masking the actual emotional issue. But I just sort of let myself have it and stuff like that. And so what I tell them is if they're acting that they have multiple addictions, multiple mental health issues, and they seem to have a really narcissistic defensive personality in which they get really defensive and don't want to look at things, I would say it's because inside they have an emotional core that, when I feel mine, I told them, like, maybe I don't know exactly what your son is going through, but when I feel mine, I feel like a frightened 8-year-old all the time. That's what this emotional core is wired to feel like, a child. And so, if under a stressful trigger, now you have a frightened child that's under stress, and that child can go into a spastic state and stuff. And so that's really emotionally dysregulated in there, and that thus the drinking, thus the drugs. So you can function. You have to tamp that down and cover it up with this kind of fortress-like narcissistic defensive personality.
And what about the loved ones of that person? What are they doing, or, as they interact with their child or their loved one who has the addiction or has these emotional dysregulation issues? How are they interacting, and is that making things worse?
So they're doing it with love and intent, but so I explained to them this, understand this. As a person who used to drink, I drank when I felt a crappy emotion, anxious, depressed, and so if someone's coming at me with anxiety, maybe you don't mean to do this. Like, obviously you want me to get better. But if you're coming at me with anxiety and it triggers my anxiety, what do you think the first impulse I'm going to have is? It's going to be to drink. My body, now I'll have to fight that. So that's thus we don't want to talk about this kind of stuff, because if you're coming at with anxiety, I don't want to have to feel that. Yeah.
Hmm.
So they're well intending. Um, Obviously they want us to get better. They care about our health and stuff like that. But I tell them the reason you're feeling anxious and the reason these conversations aren't working out is because there is an emotional agenda that you have to resolve, because it's now getting in the way of you understanding what's the best thing for them.
Yeah.
You really
So,
have to go in there almost like a clinician, devoid of your own emotional agenda, and understanding what's the best thing for them in this situation.
yeah, let's talk about that. So the parent or the loved one of the person who has the addiction has a certain desired state. They have an expectation or a wish for their loved one to not be addicted, to be able to have a job, be able to have normal relationships or whatever it might be. And so when they're talking to their child or their loved one, then they are applying pressure. They are saying things that are making that person feel bad or worse or creating anxiety.
Yeah, they're trying to hint at, well, the message that we get is they're trying to hint at, I'll feel better, honey, if you just do what you need to do to get better. I'll feel better and stuff. So, it's now we're put in a situation where we're already dealing with our own emotionally dysregulated state, but now I know my mother's getting upset or teary because now I have to placate her feelings as well.
Yeah.
And it's already hard enough. So I tell parents, like, you got to resolve that emotional agenda. So you honestly, when you interact with them, and this is dealing with this with anyone in a difficult relationship, forget about addiction. It's just better when you interact with them when there's difficulties where you're not attached to the outcome. You're not attached to their reactions, what they say, or what they do with this conversation.
But in the case of a parent, or when you have a partner or someone, where your loved one has these addictions, you are not a neutral, impartial observer. Like, what do you expect people to do in that situation? Like, their child is on drugs, they're drinking to the point that they're, a danger to themselves
Yeah, I
or
do get that. Like,
whatever.
what are we supposed to do with this fear and stuff like that? Well, first of all, let me say something here. Somebody has written in here, doesn't religion do exactly the same thing you're describing about drugs and alcohol? I'm willing to answer that question if you can expand on it. I'm not quite understanding what you're saying, whoever wrote that. If you can clarify what you're talking about, that religion does exactly the same thing as drugs and alcohol, then I'll do my best to address it. Because you said it a couple of times here, so I just want to try to address it. That's all. Anyway, so what were you saying? You were saying,
Yeah, what do you expect people to do, if you're
okay.
a parent or whatever, you know?
Okay. So yeah, the parents are caught in this, what do you call that thing? I'm blanking on it. The no way out. They're caught in this kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing. I forget that what
Yeah.
that's called.
Nihilism,
No, they're just caught in this
hopelessness,
situation. What? The
hopelessness.
movie made out of it. I forget the name of it. Anyway, they're caught in this situation where, yeah, of course it's going to trigger these feelings, but they can't keep acting that way because it's triggering their loved one's anxiety. And when that happens, it's just going to cause them to drink. So they understand that, but they are like, what do I do? So that's where the protocol comes in. Now I can talk about the protocol that I use that actually tell, when parents go through this protocol with me, they say it is miraculous. It's amazing. Like I am not anxious now when like I've just worked with a, a mother in which she said her son got into like a really bad car accident and stuff. And she said like I was concerned and I was helpful, but I wasn't going crazy inside. That was amazing because I usually get really like hyped up, controlling, overly, like anxious to the point where I'm not helping and stuff. But after doing the protocol a few times with you, Mike, I was concerned, and she said it was to the point where I was like, shouldn't I be more concerned than what I am now? Like it was amazing. So the protocol helps with. So when they say, "What do I do?" The protocol helps with that.
Hmm. And then maybe do you want to say a few words for people who are not familiar? What is the protocol doing and how does it help them?
Yeah. So again, this helps. You don't have to have addiction in your home in order to benefit from this protocol that was developed here. You just have to go through a situation where you're having a recurring relationship problem with an unwanted outcome, and you could see that you're contributing to it, actually. You can see that because of the way I am, it's just making them worse. But I can't get myself to act any differently because when I try, I feel anxiety or I feel frustration. And then I end up acting the same way, and it ends up with the same result, and we get into a fight, and it just doesn't help. And so the protocol resolves that anxiety and frustration to the point where people just say, I don't feel it anymore. It's sort of weird. And so what the protocol does is I tell them the protocol resolves the emotion that's driving the anxiety or the anger. That's what we have to do. Is like you don't resolve the problem because you're trying to resolve the anger or the anxiety. You resolve the problem, the emotional problem underneath that, that's driving your anxiety or your anger.
Yeah. So if someone was skeptical and uh, you are helping them resolve that emotion which is causing the problem, but at some level, the emotion is that they care about their loved one, they want what's best for them. Is there some danger that, that individual that you're helping will then be apathetic or not care about their loved one as much, that they'll just kind of, you know what I mean, like lose
No,
that
yeah, and the
connection?
parents do say that. The parents do say that, like your brain has convinced you that coming from an anxious state is the only way to solve a problem. But lots of times when you come from an anxious state, you overdo it, or you either freeze or you start controlling way too much, and then you see what you get. Like yeah, and parents say, well, what's wrong with doing that? Nothing's wrong with doing it that way. If you want to keep doing it that way, then keep doing it that way. What are the results you're getting? Well, my son's always getting mad at me, and now we're not even talking. Okay. So usually, so there's another way to do it. So I'd say when you're coming from a more relaxed state, what you're really coming from is your intuition. This this protocol resolves all the emotional blockage. So you're coming from your intuition, which is much more, in my opinion, peaceful state. And it processes information. When you come from your intuition, it processes information totally different than an anxious, controlling mind. And so you will help your loved one. You're here. You paid the money to work with me because you want to help your loved one. That'll happen. You're just going to come from a more peaceful, intuitive place when you do it. That's what I
Hmm.
do.
So ultimately, they're still kind of achieving their goal just in a smoother, more peaceful way. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the person here has also responded when I asked about the thing about religion. So what's interesting is they've called drug addiction, alcohol addiction, a spiritual affliction. And I, to a certain degree, believe that, that what's happening is they're not really in touch with their spiritual part of themselves that is more peaceful, takes things as they come, is much more emotionally neutral. not as spastic with the emotions. And that spiritual part of themselves is their intuition. Your spiritual part of yourself and your intuition are one and the same. And so when this person wrote about, religion and stuff like that, if your spiritual practices are religious practices and they help you to not come from your anxious, controlling, even neurotic mind and come more from your peaceful, intuitive part of yourself, then great. I'm not going to criticize that because that's what we were looking when I was drinking. I was looking to handle life, but from a more peaceful place because my mind was getting too anxious and stuff. So when I, you know, realized that spirituality had therapeutic effects on the mind, I went with it. And that's what I use now. So I just want to
So,
say that.
yeah, so if God loves you, you are complete and whole. You are everything you need to be. You don't have to be something else. Maybe that's like, people feel bad about themselves. People feel, self-loathing. People feel whatever that deep core emotion is. And maybe that relationship with God or higher power or your spiritual belief allows you then to have that foundation of self-worth and, you know, maybe meaning in your life.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of addresses, you don't have as strong of that root emotion because you believe, you have a purpose,
Well, it's when you're using your egoic thinking mind, which is mainly your personality. If people are wondering, what's your ego? Your ego is your personality. If you're using your egoic mind, which is your personality, to do a lot of the thinking and interacting in society and living life and interacting with your family, and it's causing a problem, the other part that you can use to go through life is your intuition, which is the more spiritual part, the part that's connected to God, if you want to say, or the energy of the universe, you want to say, and you're not using that part. If, again, this is not for everybody. I know people who have, they don't need to know this stuff. Their egoic mind functions fine in society. They're able to have stable families, jobs, 401k plans. They're not really needing to know this. It's for people like us that where their egoic mind, created by their brain, which has these diagnoses, is now not able to function. And now, so it teaches them to resolve the protocol shrinks the energy of that, and so now the intuition is used much more because now the energy behind this neurotic controlling egoic mind is shrunk to the one lady said it was like the size of a watermelon in my head, especially when my daughter would get mad at me. Now it's the emotional power of that, all those neurotic thoughts shrunk to the size of a pea. And now I just don't feel it as much anymore at all. It's very light in there. So I can just disregard it. Yeah.
And so can you talk about in the example of parents or loved ones, who are helping someone who has these addiction issues, does spirituality, like how does that fit into your protocol? Do you draw upon their religious practices? Like, is there a direct connection to,
It,
that intuition and spirituality? Yeah, maybe talk
Yeah,
about that
I
more.
mean, so understand that spirituality, if you're a spiritual person or a religious person, even what that does is it gives me a vernacular to talk to you. And like I might say if I'm working with somebody, are you Catholic? Are you Christian? And if they say yes, I pray and da 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 da, great. And but I'm not saying that that's a requirement. What I'm saying is there's a vernacular, a language system that I can use that resonates with you, because that's an important part of this whole protocol is I have to use language that resonates with you. So sometimes I say the word God to somebody and they're like, don't use that word. Don't even talk to me about that word. They don't want to use it and stuff. So I
Okay,
just
but
use
then
another word.
what do you do for people who are not religious or don't think of themselves as spiritual, so they don't really even have a connection with some intuition, higher power,
Yeah, and
how does that work?
well, I would just basically I found a method through working with spiritual teachers and my own practices to access the the presence of your intuition, basically, this peaceful presence of it's what I call to be non-secular, the peaceful presence of universal energy. I try to be as non-secular and almost scientific as I can, so it doesn't ruffle anybody's feathers. But if they like the word God energy, I'll definitely use that. So what I do first ask them though is, have you ever had what you would call a spiritual experience where you felt like either out of body or you felt like this bliss? And I say lots of times, even people with the addiction say, yes, I have had that. And I said, can you explain it to me? And then when I asked them to talk about it, yeah, it was when I went rock climbing or when I went to church this one time or I was meditating one time. I just felt like all this bliss came out, this peace. And all of a sudden, I just felt like my problems, that's a spiritual experience. So what I tell people is, and a good, even the people with the addictions, a good 50% of them have had this experience before. And so I help them to act. I'm just going to help you to access that again. So I try to make it as easy for them as possible. And if not, I just help them to access it anyway, because there's,
Mm,
certain things that I could say and do. And then I check to make sure. So I should say that the key to this thing is accessing the peaceful presence of universal energy, which is the presence of your intuition, which is your spirituality of connection with God. Same exact thing. That's the key. And so the protocol that I do, even with no spiritual practices or religious practices, can help a person to access this. And I check. I know what it feels like. I know what this person's feeling like. So I'll explain it. Does it feel like this? Does it feel like this? Yes, it feels like that. Or they might say, no, I'm thinking about peaceful clouds. I'm thinking about, no, that's not it. And then because there's a myriad of ways that I can help a person to access it.
yeah. I think for people who are spiritual, who are religious, I think this is kind of a well-known, this would not be very difficult for them to understand. But for someone who's hyper rational, can you explain the science behind why this would work? Like, what is it that's going on in the brain chemistry, or whatever
Mhm.
that helps people then, cre achieve this kind of understanding of oneness, or kind of that inner peace, I guess. Like, what's actually happening for the hyper rational scientific mind to explain why this would work. So if you assume that someone is like not into the woo-woo, not into the religion, spiritual stuff,
Well,
like,
okay, so two things. First, understand that explaining this to a person like that intellectually is definitely not the same as going through it and experiencing it. So, like, you can explain to somebody intellectually why you love rock climbing, and explain with the best words that you can. But if you're not doing it, you're not going to really know. The person might try to relate an experience to it. Oh, yeah, it's the way I feel when I play guitar. Okay, fine. But you have to have that experience, first of all. Second of
mm,
all, what I do want to say is somebody mentioned here, they were being very honest and said, how can I forgive someone? How can I forgive their partner for cheating? I don't understand. So this goes along with what we're saying. If somebody does something out there like cheating, and it triggers obviously some huge turbulent emotion in you, what I would say to that person first is, let's resolve before you go into what do we do about that person or about this relationship. It's triggered a huge, strong emotion in you. If you start acting and behaving from that emotion, it's almost unpredictable. Like, I wouldn't suggest acting from this, hyped up, flooded, angry, fearful emotion. We should resolve it first. So that's where the protocol comes in. And I also help somebody to say, and as a coach, if they're feeling this and something's triggered it, do your best to learn to say this to yourself. Good, because it's showing me I wasn't as emotionally stable as I thought I was. And so all this person has done, really, in a way, is show me some work that I have to do on myself. The relationship could end. Maybe you should break up with them. But I would always say resolve the emotion first that it triggered before you do anything. So that's what I would say to that person if you're going through that. So the way this is done is this. What was realized here, and certain spiritual teachers have said it too. Yes, your ego is your personality. It's what you use to interact with people. Like we're talking right now, I have an ego, you have an ego, you have a personality, I have a personality. What your ego also is it's that which holds on to unresolved emotions, possibly in your past, possibly even generational trauma that you've inherited. And so the ego is sort of like a backpack that holds on to these emotions. And under tense situations, especially in difficulties in relationships, those emotions are expressed and fuels the egoic thought and all the words that come out of your mouth. And so what this protocol does is it resolves those unresolved emotions that is fueling egoic thinking and talking and behavior that usually is way too much for the situation. So the ego is now, you still have the same personality and ego, but it's softer. People say to me, I feel softer around the edges. I'm still the same person, but I just feel like I'm a softer person. Or I feel lighter. Before, my ego felt like I was carrying a 50-pound rucksack always. And now it just feels like it's light back there and stuff because we resolved the emotional energy that the ego was harboring and carrying around.
In the case of someone where their partner cheated on them, are you saying that they would feel more at peace with themselves and in that situation? Like in that specific example, if there's the deep hurt, fear of losing that person or whatever it might be, through the protocol, and they have this kind of maybe understanding of their own, what's going on. How does that actually, resolve this issue that their partner cheated on them? They don't then get as worked up about it. They're not as angry about it. They're not as fearful about it,
Well,
and
like
therefore
I
whatever
said,
happens
when
will be
you
fine.
do this work, yeah, when you do the, before you do this work, most people, including the parents of addicts, or most people in relationships, you're coming from your ego. You're coming from your personality, which is fine. That's what you're supposed to do. Like, brain creates the personality. The personality is how you interact with people. If you didn't have a personality or an ego, I don't know what you'd look like. Really, you look like a robot. I have no idea. So it's perfectly fine to have it. It's when it's carrying and holding on to all this unresolved emotion and possibly trauma energy that's now being used. So this is why especially when a person cheats on you, it can bring up things like this. Just the last time when my last husband cheated on me, or my
Mm,
dad cheated on my mother, or like something that was an unresolved trauma that happened back there that now, in addition to just having to deal with this problem in the current reality, now the brain is still dealing with this problem back there,
mm.
holding on to all the emotions of it. So what this protocol does is, and what I say is that let's resolve all that stuff first and then go. Because what I tell them is, I don't know how to advise you in this particular situation. But I can tell you that when you come from your intuition, the answer will come out much more peacefully and smoothly and sometimes quickly when you're not fighting all of this unresolved emotion in there.
Yeah, so regardless of whether or not this couple works it out or if they wind up splitting up, hopefully it'll happen as smoothly as possible. Yeah.
Um, it'll happen the way it needs to happen, and there'll be acceptance.
Okay.
So it could be easily just like, you know, when resolving the emotions, the person decides to have a conversation with their partner and they get the help they need. Or in resolving the emotions, the person in one fell swoop says, and I realized why I was doing that and I resolved the emotions around it. And so thank you very much for doing this because it helped me to grow as a person. There's the door. Because I've asked you to, several times if you could change this, 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 or this, and I'm still seeing the same behavior and stuff. And there's a resistance to that. I just can't be with a person like that. So it can be like that fast too. It can be like that smoother.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Great. And so maybe I don't know if there's anything else in the comments you want to address, but otherwise we could explore a little bit more. Anything
Yeah,
else?
that's good. There's no more comments about that particular thing. So,
Okay.
and the other person about the religion thing, someone's also asking, what do you think about using plant medicines? For example, ayahuasca, mushrooms, something else, kuma. So, I mean, I do think that there is validity and valid studies when it's being used and studied like this, because I've worked with people in Canada where they don't have extreme laws around using plant medicines for treatment. So I've worked with people who've been through psilocybin treatment for therapy, ketamine treatment even for therapy, and they did say it helped, that it helped to loosen their inhibitions, relax more so they can begin looking at their issues without the emotions getting too intense. And it did help them moving forward in the future. And so, when I work with people who've said that and studies are promising that, and so I'm of the viewpoint if you've tried a lot of things, that are inside the box of what people say, diet, sleep, exercise, therapy, the usual kind of stuff that people would say to do. If all that stuff helps you without needing that, then fine. On the other hand, I've worked with people who've done all that stuff like me, and it wasn't like enough and stuff. And if you're really suffering out there or even dying from your addiction out there, then yeah, it might work to help to go outside the box. But I would always suggest to do it in a safe environment where, you're being monitored, um, if you can, by medical staff, so that way, somebody who can guide you through it and is monitoring you medically as well. That's what I would suggest.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of studies that talk about psychedelics and the effect on the brain and quieting the default mode network, allowing you to make connections to, different parts of your experience. Like the filter that we have on our everyday lives is lessened. So the things that normally your brain filters out because it's not important for survival, not important for your day-to-day life, now you're starting to experience them, including emotions, including senses, smell, taste, touch, whatever it might
Yeah.
be. And then you're able to then, I think, in some way, deeply access your emotions in a different way.
Yes. So, and some spiritual teachers in the 60s, like I would say, Ram Dass, Alan Watts, they would suggest. So these are people I'm talking about these names, Ram Dass, Alan Watts, who were quote unquote spiritually awakened, or you could say had an ego death. Sort of similar to what we're talking about here. Their ego got thinned out so much that they're working and interacting with people in a very thin ego that is devoid of all this unresolved emotion. And they said, if you want to know what it's like, at least temporarily, to be spiritually awakened or have an ego death, try out these medications. Try them out, and you'll know temporarily what it's like. And it's sort of what you just sort of said there. It lessens the intensity of the ego. And they've also said, like, you do not realize that all that emotional weight that the ego is carrying around and harboring that was unresolved, you don't realize just how heavy that is energetically in the body, and you don't realize just how much it's affecting your life until it's gone.
Yeah. I think this is the thing that's so striking about psychedelics is that, with a high degree of reliability, people who take them experience something. And when they experience whatever that is, it's a glimpse into how, their life might be because it removes the filter, it allows them to see things differently. Now, it doesn't necessarily stay that way. You can
No, it
continue
doesn't.
on with your
So,
life, but at least you've
so
seen it.
yeah, yes. And it can, I think it can change some of the neural connections to help you have more insights that can be kept up that, I think you would definitely need to keep talking about your experiences with it. So I should say this because this also started with the parents dealing with addiction. And they've asked me things like, well, what about this plant medicine stuff, Mike? People have said, because I'm desperate. My son is dying out there. He's overdosed like 3 times already. And I've heard about this ayahuasca mushroom stuff, things like that. But what do you think of it? I mean, I'm scared that it's a drug and he's going to get addicted to it and stuff like that. And like, so what I explained is just what I said to you, that if you feel that everything else that you tried in usual treatment in Western is not working and there's still had the possibility of dying out there, yeah, I would be willing to consider something outside the box, but do it in a controlled way with medical staff. And yes, I've heard from people who said I was a lifelong alcoholic, and when I went through this ayahuasca or mushroom experience or something like that, I got sober. Or I was a lifelong smoker and I stopped smoking. So it can rewire things in there, but definitely, do it in this kind of way in which, you're monitoring it and stuff like that. And the other important part, like you said, is it's really important. They have when they do these plant medicine things, they have what's called integration groups, or they suggest to work with an integration therapist or coach, someone just to keep talking about it, keep
Right.
talking about it, like what your experiences were, so you can then enforce what happened and start to use those things in your lives. Because then the old egoic addicted mind, it's possible for it to come back, all that kind of thinking over, a few months. So if you keep talking about your experience to enforce the shift from somebody who understands and can help you with that. Now, that'll stay with you.
Yeah. I think of it in case it's not clear. We're not talking about recreational drug use here. We're talking about a serious, therapeutic process. So I think set and setting is very important if you're looking into these things. You know, your frame of mind, your mindset going in, and what are you trying to explore? Really important for that. And
Yeah.
I think that this is true for many, including your own protocol. What are you bringing to it? What are you trying to get or access or, understand? That's really important to the process. In addition to afterwards integration, talking through it, really understanding and, making it part of your life and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. I would never suggest like, oh yeah, psilocybin is great. So get it off a guy off the street. No, I mean, try to find a clinic, try to find a place that they've done this many, many times and they're monitoring. And I would also see what are their results? Do you do aftercare plans and follow up with your clients? And what are the results of it too? Because that's important to me. Someone's also put in here, how do you cope with living with abusive parents? They won't stop hurting me mentally and physically. So I have worked in situations in which I'm interacting with the parents or sometimes the wives or the husbands, and they say, I have to go into the closet because he just came home and he's really angry. So I have to go into the garage or something like that. As soon as I hear something like that, I'm like, hold on, are you safe? Like, I'll stop coaching. And because first and foremost is your safety. Like, none of this coaching is going to be able to take effect if you're not safe and you're being physically threatened and stuff. So do what you need to do to extricate yourself from this kind of situation so you can, be safe from harm and physical threat. And yes, if you need to take advantage, call the authorities. If you need to do that, like the police, that's why the police are there. The police are there as a social service to help in these kinds of situations. Use them if you need to. And definitely, I've worked with parents in which they said, yeah, we've had to call the cops on our son who's getting nabbed in our basement, like several times. He's better now, but there was a time when we had to call the cops. Yeah.
Can we explore this? And I don't know if this is an appropriate line of way of thinking about it, but if you have an abusive partner, there's something going on with them which is causing them to be abusive. They are in some way, informed by everything that's happened to them in the past, right?
Yes.
Does your protocol help in this situation? And if so, how?
Help with
The
the
person
person
who,
interacting with that person or the person with
right,
them.
the person interacting with that person, because presumably you're not going to get that abusive partner to work with you directly. They probably don't realize they have a problem. They probably don't think they need help.
Mm.
So how do you help someone who's in a relationship like that?
Well, yeah. So again, I would say the same exact thing. Extricate yourself as much as you can from that situation, so you're safe. Um, get whatever kind of support services and help that you need to help you out. If you feel that you are quote unquote stuck in this situation, you know, uh, then I would also then work on the emotional aspect of it. So you're coming from a much more intuitive place,
Hmm.
with this, because lots of times when you're coming from an anxious, controlling mind that's depressed, anxious, always thinks the same kind of way, pretty much sort of, I used to think that way. Like, it sounds like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh in a way. I'm not trying to make fun of you, but it sounds like there's no hope. There's nothing I can do. There's just no hope, no matter what I try. And it's not that that's not true. It's that your brain isn't giving you a lot of options. It's not giving you a lot of options on how to think about this differently. But when you
Hmm.
resolve the emotions, you'll be able to come from a more peaceful place in your intuition, and you'll have access to different kinds of thoughts on how to handle the situation than just I'm screwed.
Yeah.
So I've come from
I
that.
think
I've come from that kind of mind. It gives you very few options to solve the problem. I'm screwed and there's nothing I can do. Might as well use. That's the result of a mind when you don't resolve those emotions like that.
hmm. And when you're able to really access the emotions, then there are many more possibilities that open up because you're no longer as fearful, or you don't have the feeling of self-loathing or whatever the issue might
Yeah.
be.
I mean, imagine, trying to solve any kind of problem, but you're overhyped up on anxiety and depression, and or noticing somebody doing that, and they're trying to do some kind of work project or something, and you're noticing, yeah, like they're coming from anxiety. They're coming from a lot of anxiety and depression, stuff like that. Are they going to be able to resolve that work problem well? Well, compared to if they were just much more relaxed, in tune with, reality, in tune with themselves, more harmonious with their life situation. Unless you're like trying to survive being eaten by a tiger and you have to run, you know, having that kind of mindset is really not going to help you even to resolve a difficult problem like this in a relationship, in relationships.
Yeah. I think this also highlights how we sometimes rationalize our actions. We justify what we do through kind of cognitive, through intellectual, you know, arguments, rationalizations. And maybe this is a way of making ourselves feel better about our decision or our non-decision.
Yeah.
It's helping us feel better about ourselves. It's still in some way a mitigating, repressing that emotion deep down inside, that intellectual rationalization of why we're doing something. And so maybe understanding the emotional core and dealing with that is an alternative or maybe better way of trying to understand what's going on and how to deal with it.
So I can only talk about my experience. So coming from my experience, being a counselor myself, being a coach, having been in therapy for years, working with many, many different therapists, you can work through the egoic mind structure. I mean, like, just general talk therapy, talk coaching, working with the intellect, stuff like that, to get to a conclusion that's more peaceful inside, where you've shifted their energy to something. From my experience, it takes a lot of time to do that. You would need several sessions. Uh, Certain kinds of therapies are designed to act in a totally different way, like EMDR, if you've been through trauma, to resolve those patterns of the mind by resolving the emotions, but like things like that. But if you're just doing it through talk therapy, you have to placate the mind's worries. So the mind, like I said, is that the egoic mind, your personality, when there's unresolved emotions and even trauma in there, it's coming from an emotional place and trying to interact or solve a problem with somebody that's now has all this other agenda attached to it, that it's just trying to calm this part down and maybe not making great decisions out there because it's trying to like calm this part down. But if you try to work through that, the interesting thing about the ego is, from my experience, it really doesn't want to change. It wants to calm down. It wants the situation to change, but it doesn't want to change. And so that's why it takes a long time. It's going to argue its case all the time and argue like, well, don't you think I should do this? Don't you think I? And that's, and then from its point of view, yeah, it's true. You should talk to it like that. What this work does is, once I realized it's being fueled by these emotions that are unresolved, and that's why it's talking that way and doing these things. Let's resolve the emotions. What I found is, and that's what parents of people with addiction have found when I go through this protocol with them, their thought structure, their egoic mind in dealing with the problem is much more subdued, much calmer, much more thinned out, less heavy, less anxious. And the miraculous thing about it was done without talking. It was done without this back and forth talk therapy. It was done through this meditative, you could say spiritual protocol that resolves the emotions and helps you to get in touch with your intuition in a short period of time using the peaceful presence of universal energy. And so then when they talk to their loved ones, they're much more relaxed and they said, like, my son or daughter hasn't necessarily gotten better, but our relationship has gotten better. So when I work with people in these kinds of situations, I tell them, I can't tell you that we can do something that'll control that. If you want, we can do control measures on that person, but it's not going to necessarily help the relationship because you're doing behavioral modification. Yeah, set boundaries, give consequences, things like that. We can do that and all, and if it's necessary, if they're really being threatened and it's necessary, yes, we should do that. Definitely. But if they're not in that kind of situation, I suggest to resolve the emotions over here first. And so what they tell me is, my son and daughter, they haven't necessarily gotten any better, and you haven't promised me that they would get better. But what's gotten better, and you did promise me, is I'm more peaceful. I feel like I've gotten myself back. And as a result of that, I had one mother tell me, even though I don't know, and my daughter's still having problems, and I honestly don't know if she's going to make it, but thank you because you've given me the ability to have the best, most connecting relationship I can with her that I've never been able to have before because I was always coming from these hyped up, anxious emotions all the time. So that's, that's success to me in this kind of protocol.
That's awesome. I think that's a good place to end, unless there's any other final questions or comments.
Um, no, I don't. Well, I'm quickly scrolling through without being able to read every single one. So I apologize if I've missed you and your questions. So I did my best to try to
Yep.
get to everyone here. So
We
many.
can pick it up next week.
Yeah, we could talk about if this is a topic that everyone wants to hear. I'll make a video on this platform that will give people a chance to comment. Did you want me to continue this topic, or is there another topic you'd like us to talk about next week and stuff? So thank you, everyone, for this, and have a great morning.